Quality, comfort, and grip at an affordable price. Whether it's our standard, pro, or elite socks, there's an option for everyone. Try a pair for yourself now at puregripsocks.com.
Believe it or not, we are now past the halfway mark of 2025, and over the last couple months in particular, some amazing football boots have been released. Where of course I made a top 10 list in early 2025, and with so many new boots having released, I figured it would make sense to update it. However, in trying to do so, I realized that in removing boots from the previous list and inserting new ones, the ones that I took off, I wanted to give honorable mentions to, and it just didn't make a lot of sense to have 5 honorable mentions. Why not just make it a top 15? So that's exactly what I'm gonna do. Here are my picks for the top 15 football boots in mid-2025. Keeping in mind that this list is in no particular order, simply because there isn't one boot that's going to be best for everybody, which I think is what people tend to believe when they see a top 10. The number one obviously means it's the best boot on the market. Not necessarily the case, because everybody likes something different. And of course, if you are interested in any of the boots that you see in today's video, you can pick all of them up below their normal retail prices by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes via the links down below. And really quickly, before we get started, if you enjoy the list videos, don't forget to drop a like on this one. And if you appreciate the unsponsored, unsugar-coated, brutally honest opinions on this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2025. While they've yet to establish themselves as a major player in the football boot industry, Under Armour is one of those brands that I'd love to see do well, because I think they're capable of making some really good stuff, with the Shadow Elite 3 definitely being their best effort in quite a few years. What I like about this boot is the IntelliKnit upper that, as you can see, kind of has this 3D textured ridge design that definitely is reminiscent of the Mercurial Superfly 5, for those that can remember those all the way back from 2016. However, unlike the Superfly, this definitely has more forgiving width and shaping to it that makes it remarkably comfortable if you're looking for that soft, knitted feel with just a little bit of padding to the touch on the ball. It also features a carbon sole plate that offers some pretty decent responsiveness, and while unusual, a traction pattern that is very aggressive and kind of in the realm of other top-end speed boots. The one knock against it is maybe that it's not as light as most top-end models, but that is not to say that they're heavy either. And as far as pricing is concerned, $220 isn't crazy, but because they're not the most popular, you can regularly get them on sale, making them pretty decent value for money. One of the most popular top-end football boots currently on the market, and for good reason, the Adidas Predator 25 Elite, in particular the FT model with that fold-over flap tongue held down by the elastic strap, is just a really unique combination of features when compared to just about anything else currently on the market. The Hybrid Touch 2.0 synthetic upper, while a little bit thinner than I think a lot of people might expect based on this very traditional Predator styling, offers a really nice touch on the ball and also a remarkable amount of security and lockdown with the laces tied tight. These definitely feeling a lot more nimble than I think what a lot of people would expect. It features a sole plate and stud pattern that is ultimately very similar to what you're going to find from the F50 line in terms of feel and general lightness. And of course, you're getting that extra grip from the strike skin rubber elements scattered through the main area of the foot that's going to be making contact with the ball when shooting and generally just taking free kicks, which I think make for a tremendous amount of control. The looks and styling are kind of the cherry on top, in that it's just undeniable that they're very cool looking football boots. And if you want that kind of combination of modern technology and nostalgia, this is definitely one of the boots to have. While the hype has quieted down quite significantly from when these first dropped, the Squitos Scuetta is still an absolute sleeper of a choice within the speed category if you're looking for something that is not only super comfortable and great in terms of performance, but also fantastic value for money, retailing for $200, which is nearly $70 less than all of its main competition from Nike and Adidas. What I love about the Squitos Scuetta, and as I've said in the past, is that it has a lot of elements that are reminiscent of the 2014 F50 Adizero, one of the greatest speed boots of all time. Super soft, very thin, remarkably comfortable considering how thin it is, and with a sole plate and stud pattern that does differentiate itself from a lot of other options in the speed category, particularly with these longer bladed studs that just provide plenty of bite. As a negative, I don't necessarily think the sole plate stands out compared to a lot of other speed boots in terms of feel, and certainly it's not as light as some of the speed boots that are currently on the market, but that is not to say that it's heavy. For what they cost, and certainly if you're looking to try something different outside of the big three, you can't go wrong with the Scuetta. The Adidas Copa Pure 3 Elite is a fantastic football boot that I would argue has gone a little bit underappreciated, but at the same time, I kind of understand why. In that $250 at full retail kind of opens you up to a bunch of other amazing football boots if a leather upper is what you're after, which is ultimately the main draw of this particular football boot. Of course, it's just a calfskin material that makes up the front part of this fusion skin upper, which I do know bothers a lot of people, and you can get kangaroo leather football boots for less than this. So that is definitely worth noting as a potential con for the Pure 3 Elite. However, in terms of the fit, touch, and general experience of playing in this football boot, it's one of the softest uppers currently on the market and just remarkably comfortable overall, particularly in the heel. I absolutely love this design. The sole plate and stud pattern is on the flexible side and generally more traditional, but not without lacking some modern influence in terms of how it feels. So overall, it definitely is kind of the modern Tiempo Legend if you're not a fan of the synthetic direction that the Tiempo Legend line from Nike has gone into, where for me personally, it's not necessarily a first choice for a leather pair of football boots, but it is undeniably a very well-rounded product if you're after something with a little bit of extra softness and cushion to the feel on foot and the touch on the ball. What would a top 10, or in this case top 15 list be without at least including a pair of Mercurials, where it's pretty undeniable that the current generation, whether it's the low-cut Vapor 16 Elite or the mid-cut Superfly 10 Elite, is just a fantastic option in the speed boot category. Crazy light, super tight fitting, remarkably comfortable considering how tight they fit. The added grip from the grip knit upper on most colorways is something that definitely makes these stand out compared to a lot of other speed boot options. Very aggressive traction, as we've come to expect from any FG Mercurial layout, and of course the very unique underfoot feel from that 3/4 length zoom unit. This has been pretty well the most popular football boot in the world for well over 15 years now, and rightfully so. It really is that good if it's your cup of tea, where if you've always worn Mercurials, and especially if you've always wanted Mercurials with some extra grip on the ball, there's really no reason to stray away from the current Vapor 16 or Superfly 10. But if the Mercs aren't crazy enough for you, it might be worth looking into the new version 2 Adidas F50 Plus that of course gives us the central lacing system and standalone tongue that we were all asking for with the first variation that was exclusively available as a laceless product, and with this revamped upper that's just significantly thinner, softer, and just generally more pliable. This is pretty much the most extreme football boot currently on the market. For from a fit, comfort, and touch perspective, they are thin, remarkably comfortable, and pretty much offer no extra padding whatsoever. And then underfoot, you get that double sole plate construction with the Lightstrike Pro inserts that elevate the forefoot, giving this a super unique feel when it comes to running and a ridiculously responsive underfoot sensation. They are certainly not for everybody, and like I said, a bit of an oddball compared to just about every other product on the market. But if pure performance is what you're after, if you can get used to the way that these both look and feel, I'm not sure that there's a better performing speed boot out there. I had these in my early 2025 list, and as I was trying to construct this one, the made in Japan Mizuno Morelia 2 is just one of those boots that I had such a hard time leaving out, because as much as, again, I love something like a Copa Pure 3 Elite, when we're talking about a pure leather football boot experience, there is no denying that this is the gold standard, all over kangaroo leather, incredibly soft, and simply put, the most comfortable football boot on the market, at least for me. Again, everybody likes something different and is going to experience football boots in their own way. People also have very different shaped feet, but I think for the vast majority of people that have tried this particular product, they'll agree that it's one of the most comfortable football boots they've ever had on their feet. The touch and fit is next level. They're much lighter than you'd expect them to be given their old school appearance, and while the sole plate and stud pattern, like I said, is definitely more on the traditional side, for this style of boot, it all just comes together and works super well. They're very expensive at $280, but you certainly get what you pay for from a quality perspective. It's one of my go-tos when I'm not testing out new boots, and that's simply down to the fact that they are so comfortable. Technically a new boot, but not really, because the changes are so minor. The Puma Ultra 6 Ultimate is still a fantastic option in the speed category that offers pretty much everything that you could possibly want out of a top-end speed boot at a price tag of $240, which in itself is less expensive than the F50s and the Mercurials of this world. However, given that they're not the most popular, especially the Ultra 5 Ultimate, which is the old generation, but basically the same boot, when you can get them on sale for in and around $100, it's pretty much the best value for money speed boot option out there. They're thin, they're comfortable, they fit remarkably well, they provide extra grip on the ball that you wouldn't necessarily expect, and with the plastic plated variation, they're not necessarily the lightest speed boots in the world, but still ultimately do feel light on feet, provide really aggressive traction, and unlike the carbon one, just have more of a normal flex to them. Still responsive, don't get me wrong, but compared to the carbon model, just much more easy to get along with, and I also find to be quite a bit more comfortable, which is also why amongst the pros wearing the Puma Ultras, they tend to gravitate towards the plastic plated one rather than the carbons, which I would argue are a little bit more of an acquired taste. The Adidas Copa Icon 2 is not only fantastic value for money in the sense that it's basically a high-end product at a pro tier takedown model price tag, but I think what makes it special is that it's the exact opposite of what you would expect from the big brands in 2025, in the sense that this is basically Adidas's take on the Morelia Neo, which is kind of crazy to say, but it's the reality of this situation. You get a soft, padded calfskin leather upper in the forefoot. That's going to be your main differentiator when compared to a Mizuno product, with a synthetic material through the midfoot, a nice traditional central lacing system and U-throat design. Again, a super comfortable heel that relates very closely to the also awesome heel on the Copa Pure 3, with effectively an F50 Adi Zero sprint frame with what they call an FG stud pattern, but what is actually the dedicated AG plate on all of Adidas's Elite models that you could pay as much as $280 for. However, you're getting it on a pair of football boots that retail for $100 less, which also means that this football boot is FG AG friendly, because let's be honest, this AG plate is basically an FG one that they're classifying as AG for whatever reason. Nonetheless, if you want a slightly padded, lightweight FG-AG, effectively leather F50 Adi Zero, that's what you can get in the Icon 2 at a much lower price than every other top-end model on offer from the three stripes. But if budget is less of a concern and you just want the best of the best, as far as a leather speed boot concept is concerned, it's pretty much impossible to beat the made in Japan Mizuno Morelia Neo 4, which I have here in the beta variation, but personally I also really like the non-beta model that gives you the traditional youth-road construction and swaps out the textile through the midfoot for this really soft synthetic material. Regardless, both versions are really good, where of course the kangaroo leather in the forefoot is pretty much as soft as it gets, and also strikes a nice balance in terms of thickness, where it's definitely on the thinner side, which allows for great feel for the ball, but it's still thick enough to where you can get that sense of softness from the premium kangaroo leather. The lockdown and general fit of the boot, along with the structure of the upper through the midfoot, gives this a very secure speed boot-esque feel. The fit and comfort, as you'd expect from made in Japan Mizuno, is really solid. It's a lightweight construction. The sole plate, I would say, is more flexible than what you're going to find from a lot of top-end speed boots, but again, very fitting for this style of design. And of course, it's kind of unique in the sense that it's a speed boot with all conical studs that, again, might look fairly traditional, but the length, profile, and even angling of the studs make this perform much more aggressively than I think a lot of people might expect. The made in Japan model is obviously very expensive, retailing for $320, but as always with Mizuno made in Japan, you do get what you pay for, and if you just like the concept but don't necessarily care about the made in Japan part, you can opt for the Elite variation that's made in Indonesia that retails for $200 and gives you basically 90% of the same experience. This is a boot that I've kind of changed my mind on, and for the most part, it's really grown on me, and it's the laceless F50 Elite, where, don't get me wrong, I think the laced variation is also really good. For the vast majority of people, it's actually going to be the best choice as far as F50s go, and it's just one of those very easy to get along football boots in general. But I think the laceless model, not only because it's obviously getting a lot of attention when it comes to pro usage, which you have to keep in mind when you see big stars wearing any football boot, let alone laceless ones, you do have to keep in mind that they are custom made for their foot, which is obviously going to make a big difference in terms of fit, feel, and overall performance, where, as I always say with laceless boots, you do lose out on adjustability. So if you put them on and they don't feel quite right, that feeling is not necessarily going to get any better. But if they work for your foot type and you just like that sensation of not necessarily having your boots be overly tight, I think this is one of the better laceless football boots Adidas have ever put out. Comfortable, simple, really clean in terms of touch on the ball, and the more flexible sole plate that the F50 in general seems to have compared to a lot of other speed boots works well with the overall design. For $260, it's not crazy as far as the price is concerned, and again, because Adidas drops them in so many different colorways, you can often find them on sale, where if you're on the market for a pair of laceless football boots, I would argue that this is the one to have. With this being the reason why I had the laceless F50 on the list rather than the laced version, the Mazuno Alpha 2 is, simply put, the best raw synthetic speed boot currently on the market. The synthetic upper is thin, but also pliable, and certainly not lacking in structure to where you get that true one-to-one barefoot feel on the ball without any sort of flimsiness. But I think what's so unique about this boot is the zero glide liner that lines the entire underside of the upper, that gives you the most secure connected sensation of any speed boot currently on the market. If you want it to feel like the instant that you react is the instant that your boots react, this is the one for you. The nice deep central lacing system allows for incredible adjustability and lockdown. The comfort, considering how thin the upper is as good as it gets as far as a thin synthetic speed boot goes. And the sole plate and stud pattern is also remarkably responsive and way more aggressive than it looks, where in general, I just like everything about this boot. It's not really my general cup of tea. I tend to gravitate towards boots that have a little bit more of a padded upper, but if I were going to wear something thin and synthetic, this is the one that I would choose. The made in Japan variation that I have here is awesome in terms of quality, but very expensive at $320. My recommendation, however, would be to go for, again, the Elite model that retails for just $180. And in all honesty, it's really difficult to tell a difference. So the best speed boot on the market, if you want a thin synthetic, is also the cheapest one. Another personal favorite of mine is the Messi variant of the F50 Elite, which for mid-2025 has undergone a little bit of a refresh, with changes being relatively minor overall. Some people liking the change, some people not liking it as much. Long story short, they've increased the volume and the width of the toe box and forefoot area ever so slightly, and because of the new graphics package and the way that it's embossed, you will find that certain parts of the upper are a little bit stiffer and certain parts are a little bit softer when compared to the previous graphics package. I don't think it overall makes for that big of a difference, but it is definitely something worth keeping in mind, where if you had the first ones and really don't want a different feel, I'd recommend going back and buying the old graphic variation if you're in need of a new pair. But if you want to try something new, by all means, this latest version is still really good. The Hybrid Touch 2.0 upper, I think, is the best variation of Hybrid Touch currently on offer from Adidas. The grip texturing on the surface gives it a little bit of grittiness on the ball that definitely gives you extra grip without being sticky. The Messi burrito style tongue and central lacing system, I think, is the best on offer within the current F50 lineup. The boots are comfortable, they're lightweight, and the sprint frame sole plate and stud pattern just works super well with the design of this upper. It's about time Messi has had a football boot that is worth buying. So I'm really happy to be able to say that the Messi F50 is one of the best speed boots on the market, especially if you want something that has that little bit of extra padding. The previous generation was really underappreciated, and I don't necessarily see people treating the new Tequila V5 Elite any differently, but for those that were fans of the Kangalite days of the CTR 360 Maestri series from Nike, or maybe even this Kangalite Magista Opus 1 or 2, this kind of feels like a reincarnation of that concept with this incredibly soft, dynamic touch tech synthetic material. It's soft, it's pliable, it's not too thick, but it still has that little bit of cushion, and they even have some micro texture on the surface that gives you some additional grip on the ball. The lacing system, as you can see, is very CTR 360 and Magista-esque, being pushed to the medial side, and the boots as a whole just have excellent shaping and fit characteristics, making them very comfortable. Because they're New Balance, you can get them in regular as well as wide fit, making them very accommodating for basically any foot type. They're a lot lighter than you'd expect something in the control category to be, and the sole plate and stud pattern, while technically all new compared to the V4, it's more so a subtle redesign in the sense that the stud pattern remains pretty well identical and the sole plate feels pretty similar as well, with of course the main standout feature being those studs right to the edge that are kind of like a half length. So when you are kind of on the edges of your feet, which are going to be quite frequently, there's a chance that these extra studs will help dig into the ground and prevent a slipping situation, where I've always said I'm not a big fan of boots by position, but I think for a goalkeeper in particular, when it comes to diving in general, having those studs so close to the edge just seems like something you would definitely want to have. While the looks are controversial, the feel and performance is undeniable. The Nike Phantom 6 that takes over for both Luna 2 and GX2, now available in mid-cut form like I have here, which also includes a lace cover, or low-cut form, which saves you a little bit of money and gives you the hooded design from the original Phantom GX. Both boots are just fantastic if you're looking for that sock-like knitted feel in terms of the comfort on foot, but also additional grip from Nike's Grip Knit technology that really just feels fantastic on the ball and truly does give you a sense of control. I like the mid-cut version in particular in that with this lace cover, the Grip Knit extends a little bit further across the top of the foot, providing grip in an area that otherwise you wouldn't have on the low-cut variation without adding any extra bulk. So it is similar to the Predator concept in that regard, but you don't actually have any physical elements strapped to the surface. It's just incorporated as part of the material. The new shaping, I think, just makes this so much more comfortable than the previous two generations of Phantom GX1 and GX2, I guess along with Luna 1 and Luna 2. And while the sole plate isn't to everybody's liking, it has been redesigned and still technically includes that Cyclone 360 setup with the FG variation. But if that genuinely isn't your cup of tea, you do have the option of going for the AG Pro version, which gives you a more traditional, dare I say, Tiempo-esque conical stud pattern. But if you want some extra bite, however, this definitely feels quite good and in general performs the part on natural grass. For me, the Phantom 6 is probably the best Phantom in, well, I guess 3 years, because the GX1 was also really good, but it's probably my favorite Phantom since the Hypervenom Phantom 3, which was quite a few years ago.